Hi everybody. It's Wednesday evening here in my neck of the woods. It's about 7:50 p.m. Central Standard Time, and just about an maybe half hour ago, I was out front with Shayla, and my boyfriend was fixing the horn on his car in my driveway, and all of a sudden I see this white and beige, like little shaggy poodle walking around. It came from the backyard of one of my neighbors, and then it came across the street and it peed by my mailbox, and it's a boy. And so I'm saying, I'm like, where's your home, little doggy? Where's your home? I'm like, go back home. And it looked at me, and then it started walking in the curb down the street towards one of the busier streets. And I was like, oh my gosh, this dog is going to get hit by a car. So I'm yelling. I'm like, someone's dog is loose. Someone's dog is loose. Hello? Is this your dog? Hello? And the neighbor where the dog came from their backyard, it's garbage pickup tomorrow, so they started putting their recycle in their lawn bags and stuff. And I'm like, hello, Dave. Hello, Nancy. Is this your dog? I said, there's a loose dog going towards the busy street. Hello, your dog is in the street. Loose. Total oblivious. Okay? So this is like 5 minutes. I'm trying to get their attention. And Nathan, my boyfriend's like, oh, don't be yelling, don't be yelling. I'm like, the dog might get hit by a car. It's going closer and closer to a busy street, And so anyway, I go in the house with Shayla before it came across the street. Let me back up. When I saw that it was loose across the street, I right away took Shayla back in the house, and I stood inside my house with the door open and the storm door, the screen door is there. And so I'm yelling from, my front door. And so my boyfriend says, well, maybe they couldn't hear you. I'm like, no, they could hear me. Because guess what? The neighbor next door to them, that's closest to me, they have a little black poodle dog named Jackson. And that neighbor came out and, saw that the dog was in the street. And then, he was saying something to Nancy and Dave. And, then they're like, oh, yeah, that's my daughter's dog. The daughter lives on the next street over. And so her mom, my neighbor, babysits her 3 little doggies while she's at work. So they apparently had it in the backyard where they have an underground pool. And it's like a little mini oasis there, but they never have invited me or other neighborhood kids, even though, my parents took her kids to a softball game when her first husband was drunk and violent, and there was a big, hubbub and everything. We said, hey, why don't we take, the girls to a softball game for a couple hours, She forgets that, I don't forget that. I have a very good memory, except for short-term memory stuff. Anyway, so back to what I was saying. So, he alerted them, and they're like, oh yeah, that's my daughter's dog. And so my neighbor Dan with Jackson went down the block and got the dog to come back this way. And yeah, and so I'm like, I said I've been yelling for 5 minutes, Nancy. I said, can't you hear me? And Dan and his wife, with Jackson, they were on the sidewalk and they saw me, and then the neighbor right across the street from me, Arena, she came outside and she's like, what's going on? I said, there was a loose dog. I said, I think it's their dog, And I said, it was in the street, And I said, I said, I'm yelling and yelling. I said, and nobody seems to hear me. She's like, and then she apologized. She said, oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't paying attention. I'm like, no, it's not on you. It's on them because it's their dog, And they were out front and they totally ignored me. And so I should preface this. I should have prefaced, that they voted for a certain someone that is in the White House right now. And my boyfriend and I didn't. And my boyfriend actually, volunteered and did canvassing for, another party, not the ones that are supporting the convicted felon, 47 felonies. There's evidence and proof that he was friends with Jeffrey Epstein. And he's mentioned in the Epstein files, thousands and thousands of times. And there's video and there's pictures of them together. So when he said, oh, I don't know who he is, I don't know the guy. That was a flat out lie. Flat out lie. He lies about everything, okay? He's lied to all of us. He's lied to his MAGA base, his supporters. He lied to the rest of us. He lied to the whole world about COVID, okay? Now, if you're going to criticize me for that, that's fine. But I have 2 coworkers that got COVID and they passed away. And they were fairly healthy people. And they were younger than me, okay? So if you're going to drop a comment or whatever and say, oh, that's BS, that's not true. Yes, it is. And her own neighbor, not her neighbor, one of her pool party people, they had a big 4th of July pool party. And this gentleman that was at the pool party got COVID shortly after the pool party, and he died. And his daughter was pregnant with his first grandchild. So the man never got to meet his first grandchild, okay? So you would think that would have snapped them out of, their coma, their MAGA coma, But I guess not, And she cussed me out in the street one winter, and I was walking, Shayla was when we first adopted Shayla, And I said, I said to Nancy, because she's older than me, she's like, I think she's in her 70s now. And I said, hey, Nancy, did you get your COVID shot? And she's like, why would I get that? That's ridiculous. And I said, millions and millions of people are dying. And I said, at that time I had lost one coworker to COVID already. And I told her, do you think she'd have any compassion? Do you think she would have said, oh my gosh, No. She started cussing me out, saying that I was a ridiculous bitch, and I was like, okay, whatever. And then they had this pool party, and this older gentleman, was going to be a grandfather, and he never got to meet the grandchild because he died of COVID. And Nancy was talking, with a bunch of us one day, and she was getting one of her trees cut down in her parkway. And I had asked her, how much, is this, how much does this cost, blah, 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 what do you got to do with the village, blah, blah, blah. And so she was talking about that, and then she said, she talked about the she talked about her friend or acquaintance pool party person that he died and didn't get to meet his grandchild. And she said, I think my daughter, her daughter works at Costco, and I think my daughter, gave it to him. And I said, what? And she's like, yeah. She's like, a bunch of people where she works were getting sick. And she goes, I think she brought, COVID to the party. And I don't know. Anyway, so you think that would, snap her out of it. But nope. So anyway, a couple days ago, I was outside with Shayla in front of my house, and took Shayla with me to the mailbox, blah, blah, blah. And Nancy and her third husband, Dave, had a whole bunch of flowers that they bought, geraniums and other stuff. And I said, "Oh, Nancy," I said, your flowers look really beautiful. I said, "They look really nice." Nothing. Ignored me. And she was looking right at me. And I waved, nothing. And so I said again, I said, "Hello, Nancy." I said it louder. I said, "Happy gardening." I said, "Your flowers look nice." Nothing. So then I said even louder, and I said, "You want to ignore me, huh?" I said, "Well, you know what? I'm going to make it so you can't ignore me. Have a nice day. Happy planting. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood." So, yeah. Anyway. So then tonight, the dog is running loose, going towards a busy street. I'm yelling for like 5 minutes. I don't know if you can tell or not. Those of you that have watched my videos and whatever, my voice is a little hoarse because I was yelling, for somebody to, come get this dog, before it got hurt, But, yeah, no acknowledgement. And my boyfriend then went across the street, and Dan and my boyfriend, were talking to her third husband, Dave. "Is that your dog?" He's like, "Oh, yeah, that's my daughter's dog, my stepdaughter's dog." And, it's like, and he's like, "Oh, thank you. No one thanked me, I'm treated like I'm the bad guy, And so my boyfriend comes in the house because I go in the kitchen and I'm blasting some music, from my cell phone, so it's not really that loud. But anyway, he's like, "You got to just roll it off. Maybe they couldn't hear you. They're older now. Maybe they couldn't hear you." And I'm like, well, if Dan came out of his house because he heard me yelling about something, chances are they probably heard me too. I said, "She ignored me the other day when I was by the mailbox with Shayla. And she was staring right at me, and I waved, nice big wave. Hello. And she ignored me. She turned her back and ignored me. So, I don't know. I guess the point of the story is, even if we vote differently and we, support different political parties, we should still be able to acknowledge one another and talk with one another, politely and calmly, There shouldn't be any name calling. There shouldn't be any swearing, But, I don't know. I guess my neighbor doesn't feel that way. But, I'm younger than her, but I guess I'm more mature. Just because your age number is up there doesn't mean that your maturity level matches it. So, anyway, and I saw that the fascia on the garage side of the house is, hanging there and blowing in the wind. And I'm just like, it's gonna completely separate. And Friday, the forecast says that we're supposed to get rain. So I'm just gonna contact my roofing guy tomorrow morning and say, have you found someone that can stop by and put a couple nails and tack it up there so it doesn't get any more water damage in there until you can get the roof and everything, done. The squeaky wheel gets the oil, I guess. So anyway, it's starting to get dark. It's supposed to be sunset at 8:10, and Nathan is trying to get some last minute weeds and stuff that has grown in between the fences here in the backyard, cut, and then you got to tie them up with twine, and they have to be, I guess they can't be longer than 4 feet, and then I think like a couple feet wide, so that they can lift it and put it in the truck. So anyway, he's busy doing that. It's much, much cooler. We're going to probably have to put the heat on tonight. Because it's going to be, instead of 810, it's supposed to be like 52 degrees Fahrenheit. And then it's going to go down into the mid 40s, in the early, mid morning. So when I wake up tomorrow morning and take Shayla out, it's going to be quite chilly. So might have to put a little sweater on her. I don't know. But good that we didn't put all that stuff away yet. But hope everybody is having a good evening, a good night, a good morning, good afternoon, whichever the case may be when you're watching this. And thank you for, watching my videos and liking. And if you leave me a comment, I appreciate it. And, Tree Hugging Buddhist. I keep trying to, reply to your comments and stuff. And then when I click on the arrow for it to, send or apply to the post, it says an error occurred. And so then I erase it and I try to do it again. Nothing. It says an error occurred. So then I back all the way out of YouTube. And then I go back into YouTube, into my channel, and to your comment on one of my videos, and it still won't work. So, I don't know. I don't know why it does that. It doesn't do that with Kirby's mom or Julie Curtis left me a comment. So I don't know. I don't know why that keeps happening. So I just don't want you to think that I'm ignoring you, because I tried to reply and YouTube won't let me for some reason. And I'm still very new at this, folks. I'm new at this whole YouTube, and I haven't had time yet to sit down and figure out how to do a live stream. But and I don't have a gimbal or any of those gadgets and whatnot. It's just my cell phone in my hand. So, I don't know. But a lot has been going on. And, good news. My boyfriend got a call back this morning from a supervisor from the appliance warranty company about our washing machine. And then the dryer. They made the exception and added the dryer to have the vendor that they use to come out to check that out, and they waived the $125 service fee as a one-time courtesy. So, sometimes it does work out, if you, have to escalate, to a supervisor. Sometimes the frontline customer service reps, can't do what a supervisor or a manager can do. That was the case sometimes, when I was still able to work and I was in customer service and stuff. So there were some things that the systems just wouldn't let us do. But the supervisors and managers had like a back end way to do stuff. So that got taken care of. And we got the parts today, well, almost all the parts for the washing machine. And so when we get the last part, then the vendor that is used to repair appliances for this warranty company, then they'll have the technician come back out, and then that's when he'll, do a further diagnosis of the dryer and see if parts are needed or what the case may be, and get those ordered and submitted and get that ball rolling. So a lot is going on, and my voice is starting to go. So I'm cooking some thinly sliced chicken breasts, and I cut up some carrots, and I just cut up an onion and put it in there with the seasonings. And so everything smells really good right now. So when my boyfriend is done doing his yard work and whatever, I'll have something good to eat. Because it is chilly outside. But they're saying by Memorial Day, which is Monday, it's supposed to be like mid-80s again. So it'll be, warmer for people to grill out and, do their celebrations and whatnot and be outside. I personally don't like the warmer temperatures, and I certainly don't like, higher humidity temperatures, because then, my body just, says, nope, we're not going to be able to cooperate today. We're not going to be able to move very well. So no can do. But lower humidity days, milder temperatures with a little breeze, I love those days. So, but it's going to be much colder, so I'm going to have to start closing the windows, and we're going to have to turn over onto the heat. So, yay, boo. All right, I rambled on long enough, I guess, and you're staring at Shayla's doggy dish, and so, yeah, I don't want to be on camera. I just don't feel comfortable doing that. So, anyway, thank you very much for your support, and I hope you have a great day, great night, and that you're happy, healthy, and safe. And remember, keep your humor and, keep kindness in your heart. And if we all just showed a little bit of kindness to the people that we come in contact with, maybe the world would be a better place. So that's my 2 cents. So take it for what it's worth. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye. And Shayla says bye-bye. Arf, arf.